So if you want to learn how to play the guitar, but you don't know where to start, you've come to the right place. In this video today, we're going to be looking at all of the basic things you need to kickstart your guitar journey. In this beginner's guitar lesson that I've put together, I have combined all of the things that I think a beginner guitar player needs to know in their first couple of weeks of playing. All of these things combined will help set you off on the path to become a great player. It doesn't actually matter at all if you've never even played a guitar before, because we're going to cover some absolute basic things to really get things kicked off for you. By the end of this video, you are going to be able to play a couple of songs, some basic guitar stuff, and you're going to feel pretty comfortable in how you've started your guitar journey. Now, the way you can use this video is you don't have to treat this as one singular lesson. You can actually break each segment of the video up into individual lessons if you wish, and all of those are timestamped down below in the description. You can work on each section of the video, and when you're ready to move on to the next one, you can then move on. But by the time you get through all the sections, you should be pretty comfortably on your way to learning how to play the guitar. This lesson is brought to you in partnership with musicradar.com. Down below in the description, there is a link to the Music Radar website, and that will take you straight through to an accompanying lesson article that I've written to go with this video. So all of the things we talk about in the video are also written out in full in that lesson, so use that as a resource as you learn as well. Inside that lesson, you're going to find everything that we talk about on video, but also a couple of extra little things as well, such as how to read some of the diagrams and some lists of songs that you need to check out. So please go and check that link out as well. It's going to be a great resource alongside this video. So before we start, you'll notice that I'm playing everything on an electric guitar today. Now for you, it doesn't actually matter whether you're playing this on an electric or an acoustic guitar. All of the things we're going to talk about in this video are transferable between the two types. You can copy what I'm doing and play it on an electric if you wish, or if you have an acoustic to hand, you can do all of these things on an acoustic guitar as well. The first thing I want to talk to you about is the parts of the guitar. Now, before we even play anything, we need to know what everything is. So the main thing on a guitar, which is the biggest visual aspect of when we see an electric guitar or an acoustic guitar, is the body. That is this chunk of wood here that everything else is mounted to. Now, guitars will come with different shaped bodies, different color bodies, you name it, it's out there. The body is the aesthetic part. So we have favorite body shapes that we all gravitate towards as guitar players. Some players like me like more classic shapes like this. Some players who are into heavier styles of music may like pointier guitars. The body really is the thing that kind of hooks our attention as guitar players. When we see a guitar body we like, we sort of instantly gravitate towards it. Attached to the body is this long piece here called the neck. The neck is very important because that's where our fretting hand is going to go. On top of the neck, we have the fretboard. That is essentially, think of this like a piano. So on top of the fretboard, which is the bit of wood on top of the neck, we have these metal lines, which are called frets. So the frets are like keys on a piano. So wherever we put our finger, we get different notes based on how the frets are laid out. On top of the fretboard, we have the fret markers. Now on this guitar, you can see they're dot markers. These will be different shapes on different guitar brands. The whole point of those is to help you navigate your way around the fretboard. And you've also got side dots on the guitar as well. So when you're playing stood up, you can see down at the side of the neck where those dots are. At the top of the fretboard, we have this small strip here called the nut. The job of the nut is to feed the strings in a straight line down the neck, but also this is where the strings start to create pitch. So if we were to strum behind the nut, you wouldn't actually get any usable sounds. This is the start of where the strings vibrate in a way that we can actually use musically. This part of the guitar is known as the headstock. Much like the body, every brand and every company will have their own aesthetics when it comes to a headstock. You may like a more classic headstock like this, or a pointy one if you're into that kind of thing. And then on top of that, we have tuning pegs, and the job of the tuning pegs is to loosen or tighten the strings to the appropriate pitch. This type of guitar has a small metal piece here known as a string tree. This is just to help with the angle the string comes over the nut. This is something you won't see on every single guitar, but certain guitars need these added. Then we come down to the other end of the guitar, so back down to the body now. And on top of the body, we have a couple of different things. So this piece here is called the bridge. This is the other point where the string vibration happens. So the guitar will vibrate from the nut to the point where it comes over the bridge saddles. Now the bridge on different guitars will look different and it'll function different. This guitar is known as a tremolo system, so I could actually use a tremolo arm to raise or lower the pitch in real time if I was playing along with that, but I'm not doing that today. And on top of that, we have 6 saddles. You don't really need to worry about the saddles at this stage, but what they're really good for is adjusting the intonation, which is the length of each string, and the string action, which is the height of each string. As a general rule, you set your action up to make the guitar more comfortable for you to play. A lot of players prefer a slightly lower string action, which means the strings are less distance from where the fret is, so it's not as hard to push down. Some players prefer a higher action where there's more distance between the string and the fret. On top of the body, we have all of the electrical components of the guitar. Now, again, this is something that will differ from guitar brand to guitar brand and style to style. This guitar has 3 pickups. The pickup is essentially a magnet with some copper coil wrapped around it. And the job of that is to pick up the string vibrations at different points of the string to create different sounds. So this guitar has 3 pickups. Other guitars you'll see may have 1, it may have 2. There's all different combinations out there. But each pickup will have a slightly different sound, tonally that is, because of where it picks up the string vibrations along the length of the string. This guitar has a volume pot, which allows me to go from completely muted up to full volume so I can control the volume of the guitar. And it has 2 tone pots. The job of the tone pots on this guitar is linked to these 2 pickups, and it reduces the treble frequencies. Again, different guitars will have different layouts in how the tone controls are used. And this guitar has a 5-way pickup selection switch, and the job of that is to select which pickup is on. So in this position, it's that pickup. In this position, it's those 2 on together. In this position, it's just the middle one. In this position, it's these 2 together. And in this position, it's just that one. That will differ according to your guitar type. You may have a completely different looking switch, or a switch that has more or less options than what I've got here. Here we have the guitar's output jack. So this is where we plug our cable that connects us to our amplifier. These are called strap buttons. This is what we put our guitar strap on when we're playing it stood up. There's one there and there's one there. And on the back of the guitar, because this has a tremolo system, I have springs in the back which control the bridge tension, but you're not going to have that in every guitar because if you don't have a tremolo, you won't have those springs. So the reason I started with parts of the guitar is because we're going to be using a bunch of these parts as we go through the video. Now, like I said, some of these parts are specific to this type of guitar. If you've got a different type of guitar, you'll have some different parts and components, but the overall idea is going to be the same. The second thing I want to talk about is how to hold the guitar. Now, that might seem obvious, but if you've never played guitar before, being comfortable in how you hold it is actually a big part in progressing on the instrument. A lot of players struggle to progress because they're just simply not able to find comfort with what they're doing. And a lot of the time that comes down to how you're actually holding it. So on an electric guitar like this, the main 2 ways we can play this is with a guitar on my right leg as a right-handed player. If you're left-handed, this would be the opposite way. So it's basically whichever hand you're going to fret with and hold the neck, it's the opposite leg. So for me, it's my right leg. And I would hold the guitar parallel to the floor or with a slight little up tilt. Because the reason for that is when my hand is around the neck, my wrist is at quite a natural angle. I don't want my wrist to be doing this or this with the guitar neck when I'm playing. I want it to be a fairly natural, neutral angle. So keeping it somewhat parallel to the floor with a little bit of an up tilt, pretty good way to start. The other way is to have the guitar on the inside leg, like so. That also speaks to the natural hand position. Some players find this easier when you're doing things that involve reaching around to the lower strings, especially if you're going to be doing some stuff with big stretches. Many players find this approach is more useful. This is the most common way that you'll see people sat with an electric guitar. When it comes to the neck of the guitar, you're going to be using your fretting hand. So there's no real set rules on how to hold a guitar neck when you play. So I would recommend just trying a few different ways out and really just finding one that feels comfortable. Now, I'm someone who's got quite big hands. So for me, my hand is really comfortable with the neck in the center of my palm. That gives me enough space to get my fingers around and my thumb can hang over the top of the neck. If you've got quite small hands, having your thumb over the top won't actually feel that natural because you're going to be really stretching around to make that work. So if you have quite small hands, you may benefit from dropping your thumb down behind the neck to give these fingers a little bit more room to come around. If we look at that from the side, you can see my thumb is on the curvature of the neck, which actually creates a space here on my hand. So I've actually got that extra room for my fingers to go around. If I'm holding it the way I'm holding it, then that space doesn't exist because my hand is basically filled by the neck, but my hand is big enough to pull that off. But if you want that space or you have small hands, you just drop the thumb down like so. Try and keep the thumb straight. Don't want to put it at any weird angles and put any strain on your wrist. Keep it straight and keep your wrist position neutral and get those fingers around. A little bend in the wrist is okay, but what you don't want to be doing is this all the time because that's going to cause you some issues in the long run. Keep your wrist as close to straight or with a slight bend if you need to. Try those two ways out and move your thumb, move your hand in different ways until you find something that really feels right and feels comfortable. Don't do anything too extreme, and when you're practicing, if it starts to hurt or feel uncomfortable, then you know there's probably an issue with how you're holding it, and you can revisit that and change it up until it feels right. The third thing we're going to talk about is tuning the guitar. Now, your guitar needs to be in tune for everything you play to sound good. So first of all, I'm just going to mess with my guitar tuning a little bit, completely blind. And the reason I'm doing this is to show you how bad it can sound when it's not in tune. So if I strum a chord, it's going to sound like this. So I think you'll agree that that doesn't sound great. So what I need to do is tune my guitar. So I'm going to be using a clip-on tuner for this. Now, guitar tuners come in all shapes and sizes. You can get pedal tuners, you can get digital ones built into computer plugins. There's all sorts of different tuners. You'll know which one is right for you based on your situation. I'm using this clip-on tuner today. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to clip to the headstock like so, and I'm going to turn it on. So that tuner is now switched on. Now, this is going to tell me, by picking up the vibrations through the neck, what the strings are tuned to. So there is a tuning known as standard tuning, and this is what we're going to tune to in this video. There are loads of alternate tunings, which we're not going to go into right now. We're going to focus on standard tuning. So my lowest string should be an E. If I play that, so that's actually tuned down to a C sharp, which is way too low. So I need to actually tighten that string now in order to get that up to an E. So my tuning now reads E, but the note is actually now too sharp because when I was playing that, you can see those yellow markings off center. That means my string's actually gone too far. Red on this tuner is too low and yellow is too high. I want that blue line in the middle to be on because that's when my string is in tune. So now that string is in tune, so I'm tuned to E. My next string should be an A. That's actually an A sharp, so that's actually too high. So I actually need to loosen that one. And that one is now in tune. The next string should be a D. I've only tuned that one slightly flat, so a little adjustment on that. And that's in tune. The next one should be a G. So that's G sharp, so I need to loosen that string. There's G. The next one should be a B. That one's slightly flat, so I'm going to bring that up a little bit. And the final one should also be E. And that's D sharp, so that one also needs to be tightened. And now my guitar is in tune. Once you're roughly in tune, you can then do some fine-tuning adjustments. So once again, low to high, it should be E, A, D, G, B, and E. The fourth thing I want to talk to you about is your picking technique, which is how you're going to be using a plectrum. So for this, we're not going to be fretting any notes. So with your fretting hand, I want you to just lightly rest your fingers on the strings. This is just going to mute the strings and stop any pitch ringing out. If you just play the strings, you're just going to get this nice dead note, and that's exactly what we want at this point. So we're going to look at how to use a plectrum. Like with holding the guitar neck, there's no set way to hold a plectrum, but the most common way is between your thumb and index finger with just a little bit of the pick sticking out. Now you can go right up to the edge and have a tiny bit sticking out, or you can play with a lot sticking out. Again, it's just about comfort, but the most common way is with a little bit sticking out like this between your thumb and index finger. You can use your middle finger if you want some more stability. Metallica's James Hetfield holds his pick this way. You can hold it just between your thumb and your middle finger. There's really no rules. I'm just showing you the most common way to hold it. When it comes to picking, what we want to do is we want to control our hand so that we're not doing these huge movements. We're going to come to that later on. What you don't want to be doing when picking a single string is going like that. So with this hand causing the strings to be dampened, what we're going to do is going to use our plectrum, and just on the thickest string, the E, we're just going to pick that string. You should have that muted sound coming out. What you want to do is you want to stop before you hit the next string. So you don't want to be going and picking two strings or all the strings. Just want that one string. When you're learning how to control your pick, you don't want to be doing huge movements. You don't want to be doing this just to hit one string. Rest your forearm on the guitar and let your wrist do the work. So just bring that wrist down a little bit just to get one hit of the string. Once you've gotten used to picking the low E string in a downward picking motion, we can then go on to other strings. So do the same thing, but go on to the A string. A good exercise for this is to pick the E 4 times, then the A 4 times. You can repeat that pattern over the other strings as well. Once you're comfortable with down picking, now we're going to do the opposite thing. We're going to go up. So this time we're coming below the string and picking upward. Combining down and up is known as alternate picking. So really this is the main goal here, is to get your hand comfortably going down and up in the same way. When you first start playing, you'll find that your down strokes are much more powerful than your up strokes, and that's completely fine. That is very normal. Once you've gotten used to playing ups on their own, like so, you can then combine the two and go down, up on the same string. The goal is to get that very consistent, and then in groups of 4, start to cross the strings. You're not really worrying about a particular sound here because I'm just using muted notes. It's all about the technique in the picking hand. Really spend some time on that because that is going to be super important later on, especially as you develop as a player. All right, so the fifth thing we're going to talk about is now your fretting technique. So now we're going to get our fretting hand going. So using everything we've learned about our picking hand, we're now going to bring this hand in. So pick a note anywhere on the guitar. It really doesn't matter for this. I'm going to use the 5th fret on the A string. So you can count your frets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's where I'm going to start. So what I'm going to do is just rest my finger on that note very lightly, and I'm just going to pick the string. So there's that familiar muted sound that we've already been talking about. Now what I'm going to do is gradually and slowly increase the pressure of this finger until the note sounds. And I'll do it again. That's the hardest you actually need to push to get a note to sound. Now, one thing a lot of new guitar players do, which is a big mistake, is they press really hard straight away. Now, in the early days, this is kind of forgiven because your fingers aren't going to have any strength of their own, your fingertips will still be soft, and it's really easy to think you just have to squeeze as hard as you need to. But really, your fretting hand touch needs to be a lot lighter than you think it needs to be. In doing this and getting this right early on, you're actually setting yourself up for good technique later on down the line. If you get into habits of pressing too hard early on, it may work for you, but let's say 2 or 3 years down the line and you're still doing that, you can develop some nasty wrist issues, such as tendonitis, which you do not want as a guitar player. Believe me, first-hand experience. You want to get used to fretting as light as you can without sacrificing the integrity of the note. So you can practice this exercise all over the guitar. Just pick different frets, rest your finger on it, pick, gradually increase the pressure. Once you've done that in a bunch of different places, then do it with different fingers. So your middle finger, third finger, and then your little finger. Try that with all 4 fingers, all over the guitar in different places. That will just get your fretting hand used to pushing down with the correct pressure. Now, getting your fretting pressure right isn't something that one practice session is going to solve. This is something that you're going to have to go back to a couple of times every single day until you just start to naturally press that hard. It's really easy to overcompensate and press really, really hard. Try to avoid doing that and drill this good habit into you now, even though this may take you a little longer to grasp certain things, because this is almost an extra step that you can add to your guitar journey at this point. It's worth doing this because it will benefit you later on down the line. So now we're going to start to look at combining different fingers. So I'm going to start with my first 2 fingers, and I'm going to start on the E string on the 5th fret. So once again, I'll count the frets: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now when you're pressing down on a fret, you want to get your finger as close to the fret wire as you possibly can. Anywhere from the middle up is good. You don't want to be too close to the back end of the fret because this can happen, and you'll end up with some quite badly deadened or twangy notes like that. You want to get in the middle or as close to the fret wire as possible for the cleanest note. So I'm doing this exercise from the 5th fret. You can do this any way you want. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play that note, and then using my middle finger, I'm going to put that finger onto the next fret, which in this case is the 6th fret, but I'm going to play that with an up pick. So I'm going to go down on the 5, up on the 6. In the early stages, if it's easier for you to just play that down, then feel free to do so, because we're really focusing on the fretting hand here. But doing it down and up will benefit you again in the long run, so if you can do that, then practice that sooner. And now we're going to start taking that across the strings. So I'm going to do it on the E string, then I'm going to go to the A string, the D string, the G, the B, and the E. So I'm kind of walking through each string. This is a really good way to build up finger independence. So you're doing down on the 5, up on the 6. Now I want you to do the same thing, but add your 3rd finger. So now we're going to go 5th fret, 6th fret, 7th fret with the 3rd finger. So we're doing 3 notes this time. And now we're going to take that across the strings. So we're going to start on the E, and we're going to end up on the high E. So much trickier now because we're using 3 fingers independently. Once you get comfortable with that, then you can go up to 4. Now the hard thing with doing 3 is because we're doing an odd number of notes, you're actually changing your picking every string. So on the first string you're going down, up, down. When you get to the A string you're doing up, down, up. Then you're back to down, up, down. Up, down, up. Down, up, down. Up, down, up. So that's actually a great picking coordination exercise as well, because you want your fretting hand and your picking hand to be working together in time. Once you get comfortable with 3 fingers, then the most difficult one is bringing in the little finger. This time we're doing groups of 4. So this is where you can change this exercise up if you need, because we're doing 4 frets at once here. So my thumb is dropped down slightly to get a bit of extra stretch. If that position is too much of a stretch, move it up, because higher up the neck, you're going to get less distance between the frets. As long as you're playing 4 frets that are next to each other, you can do this exercise any way you want. When you're ready for a challenge, you can actually go down to the 1st fret, where it's going to be more of a stretch. But starting on the 5th for this exercise, I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4 with my fingers. Down, up, down, up. And then I'm just going to take that across all the strings. Don't worry about speed with this. I played that a little bit quicker, but play this as slow as you need to. The most important thing is getting every note clear. So what you don't want is you don't want this to happen. You don't want any of those dead notes in there. You want to go as slow as you need to go so that every movement and every note is correct. Even though this is quite a tricky exercise for a new player to really get to grips with, it's incredibly useful because this trains a bunch of different skills at once. So you're working on your finger strength and coordination with your fretting hand, your ability to use your fingers independently of each other. You're also working on your picking accuracy because we're not just randomly attacking the strings, we're being very precise with our movement and then moving between different strings. But then we're also teaching our hands to talk to each other. This hand is picking in a rhythm, this hand is reacting by fretting notes in rhythm. So our hands are learning to sync up with each other as well. When you start this exercise as a new player, it's not uncommon for your coordination to not be quite right. If you're finding that, slow it down. You can really do this as slow as you need to do it. The whole idea here is every note is clean, every note is coordinated, and then the speed will come later on. Once you've got the notes in the right place, you can then start to go faster. All right, now we're going to learn some guitar chords. So a chord is when we play multiple strings at the same time with different combinations of notes fretted to give us different chords. So you're going to hear me talk about major and minor chords in this section. So without going too deep into the theory, a major chord is a chord that has a slightly brighter or more upbeat tonality, which is the sound of it. The chord will kind of evoke a more positive kind of feeling from it. And a minor chord is the exact opposite. It's more dark sounding, some people might say more sad sounding, and it will kind of evoke that sort of feeling from you when you hear it or play it. Every chord in music is made up of major and minor elements. So as you're learning to play the guitar, you'll learn how to combine these different things as you go down the rabbit hole of theory and songwriting and all those other areas that we're not going to cover in this video. There will be an infinite number of uses for major and minor chords. But every chord has a minor or major counterpart. So we're going to go through a few of the basic chords here. E, A, D, C, and G. Now these chords get their name from what's called the root note. The root note is the lowest note of the chord. Now at this point in your playing, you're not expected to know what the notes of each fret are. All I'm going to say is these chords get their name because the lowest note in that chord is that note. So you can learn fret notes this way, but don't worry about them at this point. You don't need to know them this early on. It's something you can develop later on. So the first chord we're going to learn is an E major chord. So this is the finger shape that I'm using for this chord. So what I'm doing here is my second fret on the A string is played by my middle finger. The second fret of the D string is played by my third finger. And then the first fret of the G is played with my index finger. Now when you're playing chords, you want to make sure that your fingers, as you can see here, are arched over. I'm not laying them flat across the neck like this. I'm arching them around. Because the low E, the B, and the high E string are all played as what's known as open, which is when you play the string, but there's no fretted notes along the length of the string. So if I just strum this chord from low to high, it's going to sound like this. That's because all my fingers are arched over the strings. If I put my fingers flat, this happens. And it prevents the strings from ringing. So your finger position is very important. You need to be arched over the strings. Make sure you're not resting on any other strings. So it's First finger on the first fret of the G, third finger on the second fret of the D, middle finger on the second fret of the A. You can test if your fingers are in the right place by picking each string one by one. So because I can hear every note ringing out there, I know that that's correct. If I intentionally put a finger or two wrong, and then I do the same thing, this happens. You can hear a couple of issues there. Once I know what those issues are, I can then go back and fix them. And get my chord to ring. So that is an E major chord. Now, all of the chords that I talk about in this lesson are featured on the article that I talked about, which is a great resource for this lesson. But also there's a guide over there on how to read these chord diagrams that you're also seeing on the screen right now. So go and check that guide out because that will help you read the diagrams that you're going to need to. The next chord we're going to learn is the E minor chord. So this is the same shape, but I'm taking off that first finger. So now the G is played open. So it's open E, second fret on the A with the middle finger, second fret on the D with the third finger, and then the G, B, and E are open. The third chord I'm going to show you is an A major chord. So for this one, we're not using E as our lowest note anymore, we're using A. So for this chord, the E string is not played at all. The A is our first string that we're playing that open. I'm playing the second fret on the D with my first finger, the second fret on the G with my middle finger, and the second fret on the B with my third finger, and then the high E string is also played open. So this chord, we've got three fingers that are bunched together in quite a tight space there. So you want to make sure that your fingers are properly arched over and that just the tips of the fingers are down on the frets. That one is quite a tricky one to get, so you really want to make sure your hand position is spot on there. Don't be surprised if you get a few dead notes in there in the early stages. That's okay. You can then revisit that and move your hand to suit. This is a great chord for working on your hand position like we talked about earlier in the video, because if your hand is up high like this with your thumb over the top, you may be finding that the high E string is muting like so. Use that thumb to bring the hand round and let that string open up a bit more. So it's a good chord to experiment with your hand position. The next chord is an A minor chord. So for this one, it's going to be the same shape as the E major chord that we learned earlier, but everything's going to be on a different string. So once again, we're not playing the E, we're playing the A string as our first string. So we're going from the A down. It's open A, second fret on the D string with the middle finger, second fret on the G with the third finger, first fret on the B with the index finger, and then the high E string is open. The next chord we're going to learn is a D major chord. So now we're losing the E and the A strings. The open D is our starting point here. The second fret of the G with our index finger. The second fret of the high E with the middle finger. Now you notice I've missed a string here. The third fret of the B with my third finger. So this one is tricky because this finger has to come over the high E string, but not interfere with what the middle finger is doing. If the angle of this finger is wrong, that high E string is going to be dead. So I need to make sure that's coming right the way around. Again, you can move your wrist position to give yourself some more room. Then we're going to learn a D minor chord. This one is slightly trickier. We're still starting with the open D, the second fret on the G, the third fret on the B with my third finger, and then my index finger is going to the first fret on the E. So instead of this shape, it's this shape. So the third finger actually stays where it is, but my index finger goes to the high E string and back a fret, and my middle finger comes to the second fret of the G. So that one is slightly trickier than a D chord because there's a little bit more of a stretch going on. Now we're going to learn a C major chord. So this one, the low E string is once again not in use. So starting from the A string, but our first note is actually the 3rd fret on the A, which we're playing with our 3rd finger. This is a C note. This is the note that the chord gets its name from. And then playing the 2nd fret on the D string. The G is played open. 1st fret on the B string with the index finger, like with an A minor chord. And then the high E string is also open. Now again, this is a chord that involves your hand needing to be right because you need to come over every single string. You can't get away with doing this, because if you're too flat, you're going to rest on those strings and mute the other notes. You're going to get those fingers right around and get the tips right on the notes. And the final chord I'm going to show you is a G chord. This is a G major, so we're starting with the 3rd fret of the low E, so this actually uses all 6 strings. The 3rd fret is a G note, so that's where it gets its name from. We're doing that with a middle finger. The 2nd fret of the A string with the index finger. The D and G are both played open. And then there are 2 different ways you can play the end of this chord. You can either play the 3rd fret on the B and the 3rd fret on the E with your 3rd and little fingers, as I'm doing here. Or you can use just your 3rd finger to play the 3rd fret on the E. So you can play that B string open or fretted on the 3rd fret. Doesn't make a difference either way. You may just prefer the sound of one over the other. I always tend to play this one with 4 fingers, but you can just as easily play it with 3 if you want. So there's 8 basic guitar chords. Now, when it comes to playing songs and playing them in context, you need to know how to move them around. Now, what you can do is just pick 2 chords at a time, any chords from that list, strum one of them, then move to another one, and basically move back and forth between the 2 chords. So I'll give you an example with E major and A major. So I'm just going to play one, then I'm going to move my fingers to the other one, play that, move back, play that, and just go back and forward. Like with the fretting exercises, go as slow as you need to go. Go uncomfortably slow to make sure all the movements are correct. You don't want to rush the changes, you want to make sure the changes are spot on. As you're doing this, especially with a chord like that changes the string it starts on, you want to be thinking about this hand as well. Am I strumming from the low E or from the A? And then with this hand, I'm thinking about where are my fingers going? With chord changes, it really helps to try and visualize how your fingers are going to move. So from one position, just try and imagine what each finger is going to do to get to this shape. So I'm going to imagine that my 3rd finger is going to go to the 2nd fret of the B. My middle finger is going to the 2nd of the G. My index finger is coming to the 2nd of the D. I'm just kind of visualizing that movement, and even just sitting here and moving my fingers like this without actually strumming. This is a great way to practice chord changes. If you just sat in front of the TV at home, you can just hold the guitar and move between 2 different chord shapes like so, just to get the fingers going. Now, I would recommend doing this exercise with as many different pairings from that 8 chord list as you can come up with. Once you're comfortable with playing the chord, then just pick another chord from the list and try and bounce back and forth between the 2. The reason it's good to do this in different combinations, and there's a few suggested combinations in the written section of this, is because you never know what combinations are going to come up when you learn songs. So getting to grips with not only playing chords, but being able to use those chords with other chords is incredibly, incredibly important. So like I said, go amazingly slow as you need to go, and really focus on just getting the notes correct. If you're shifting chord and you're finding 1 or 2 of the notes are dead, focus on that before you focus on the speed. Go a little bit slower, make sure the fingers land in the right place. When you strum it, all the notes are present. It's really good to drill that into yourself early, because if you start learning songs and your chord changes are slightly sloppy or rushed, it's going to reflect that way when you actually play a song. So getting that technique in at this point is very, very useful. So the seventh thing we're going to talk about now is the ability to count rhythm and then how to strum that rhythm. There's a little bit of theory in here. So with rhythm, we have a predetermined number of beats in what's called a bar. So typically for music, especially if you're playing rock and pop music, you're most likely going to come across a bar structure made up of 4 beats at a time. 1, 2, 3, 4. And when you get to the end of that bar, it repeats again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Each of the beats inside the bar should be the same length apart. These are known as quarter notes. The reason for this is because the bar of music, which is 4 beats long, is made up of 4 individual beats. Each of these beats is a quarter of the bar. So we're going to use that as our starting point for rhythm. So if we apply that to a guitar rhythm, let's just take a G chord for example here. I'm going to strum 4 even beats with this chord. And now I'm going to do 2 bars worth of that with the same chord. You'll notice how when I'm playing that, I'm not speeding up or slowing down. I'm not doing this. Everything is even. This is because the musical pulse that your drummer's going to be playing is going to be like that. It's not going to speed up or slow down, or at least it shouldn't. So we want to aim to get our quarter notes as consistent as we can get them. Now, once you've got a good handle on that, and a good way you can do this is that chord exercise from the previous part, where we were moving between 2 different chords, apply that to a quarter note rhythm. Let's say I'm changing between a G and a D chord. I could go 4 beats on the G, change to the D, 4 beats on that. The reason this works great for chord changes is because in that window between the 4 beat of one and the 1 beat of the next bar, you have that time to change your chord. So it actually makes you push yourself that little faster to get your chord changes. So quarter notes are kind of like the basic building blocks of rhythm. Once you've got those down, you can pretty much do anything else. Now we can go slower or faster here with our rhythmic divisions. So if we go slower to start with, we're going to divide the bar into 2, and that's going to give us what's called a half note. This is going to be a 2 beat note. So instead of each beat being a single note, 1, 2, 3, 4, we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you're playing on the 1 and the 3, but you're overhanging the 2 and the 4. So even though it might sound like those half notes are slower, they're actually the same speed. Now the difference is the tempo, which is the pulse that goes through the bar, that's that 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, that remains the same. What changes is the length of the note that I play over that beat. So tempo is consistent, note length can vary, and those are the 2 big differences in rhythm. So the tempo is still 1, 2, 3, 4, but I'm only playing on the 1 and the 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's also a whole note, which is a 1 note that lasts the duration of the bar. So that would be it's 1 note that I'm holding for 4 beats. So that's whole notes, which is 1 note that's 4 beats long. Half notes, which is 2 notes, which are 2 beats long. Quarter notes, 4 beats that are 1 beat long. And then the other way we can go is we can go into what are called subdivisions, which is when we divide a beat further. So the one we're going to learn is called eighth notes. So this is when we take our 1, 2, 3, 4 and we split it in half. So each beat is now going to have 2 hits on it. We're going to refer to this as an and. 1 and. So we're going to go down and up in the same beat. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. My downbeat is still my 1, 2, 3, 4. But in between those, I have an up strum. That's what I'm referring to as 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Those are called eighth notes because I now have 8 notes, but I'm still operating in a 4-beat bar. We can go further than that, but we don't need to at this point. So when you're strumming these rhythms, getting a loose arm is very, very essential here. You don't want to be tense and drag across the strings like that. You want the pick to fall across the strings. I'm just loosely moving it from the elbow. With picking, we want to pick from the wrist. With strumming, we want to use our full arm a little bit more. Keep the wrist loose and just let it kind of glide over the strings. Same is true for up strumming. We're also coming up. Try not to drag across the strings like that. Keep your hand nice and loose. So practicing your rhythm is incredibly useful. Make sure you know how to count quarter notes and eighth notes at a minimum. Then you can add in your half notes and your whole notes because you're not going to need those as much, but it is worth knowing them. All right, so now that we've learned some chords and we've learned some rhythms, we're going to learn some songs. So we're going to learn 3 very, very simple songs here to get you started. So the first one we're going to learn is the Bob Dylan track, Knockin' on Heaven's Door, and it sounds like this. So to play this, we need a G chord, D chord, and a C chord. Now the rhythm we're playing here is quarter notes, 1, 2, 3, and on the 4th beat, putting an 8th note in, we're going 4 and. 1, 2, 3, 4 and. So a great way to practice this is to mute those strings and get the picking hand going. Now don't worry about playing it at full speed, you can slow this down. 1, 2, 3, 4 and. Then we're going to start to add the chords in. So we've got a bar of G, a bar of D, and then 2 bars of C. So it's G, D, C, C. The second chord rhythm we're going to learn is from the Nirvana track Polly, and it sounds like this. So for this rhythm, we need an E minor chord, a G chord, a D chord, and a C chord. Now the rhythm for this one actually changes on each chord. So this one is a little bit trickier because this is going to push your rhythm skills a little bit. So on the E minor chord, I'm doing 1, 2, and. And then on the G chord, I'm going 3 and 4 and. So that first bar rhythmically is. So I'm basically skipping the and that is on the 1. I'm coming to the D chord next, and I'm going 1 and. Then there's a slight pause, so it's 1 and then I want to mute that just by lifting my fretting hand off, not all the way off, just off enough to release the pressure. Then I'm coming to the C chord on the and of 2. And, not hitting on the 3, and 4 and. So it's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So that bar is a little tricky because we're missing a few beats out there. Try listening to the way that rhythm sounds. Then we're going to put it together. So that one is a little trickier, but it's a great one because we've got 4 chords there and we're changing the rhythm slightly on each chord, so it's really going to get your strumming locked in. The third track we're going to learn is Free Fallin' by Tom Petty. For this one, you're going to need one of these. This is called a capo. This is a device that goes over the guitar's neck, like so, and it changes the position of the open string. So my open string now is pitched from my 3rd fret. So I don't play anything below that, I only play above it. I treat this like my nut. So my 1st fret is now where my 4th fret is, and so on. Now this means I can play all the same chord shapes, but they just sound higher. So this one sounds like this. So for this I need a D chord, a G, and an A. So my D chord is happening on the 1 beat, and I'm holding that till the and of 2. So I'm going 1 and 2, and then on the end of 2 I'm playing the G. And I'm holding that G for the rest of the bar. So it's D and 2 G. And then 3, 4 happens after the G. In the second bar, I'm hitting the G chord on the 1, the D chord on the end of 1, but I'm holding that until the and of 2, where I play the A chord. So it's G, D, 2, and. That's where the A is. G, D, 2, A. And holding that for the rest of the bar. So that whole thing together has 2 different rhythms with a lot of space. Now those 3 songs are great starting choices for a beginner guitar player because they really start to push your chord changes and your rhythm skills. Now, like I've said a bunch of times, don't worry if you can't do it at full speed. Start slow, build up the speed once you've got the technique nailed. Inside the written part of this lesson, there's also a bunch of other songs which I think are great ones to check out for new players as well. They all use the basic chords that we've learnt with some simpler rhythms. So if those 3 songs don't work for you, go check out that list. There's a bunch more songs over there that you can learn as well. Alright, so now we're going to learn some fretting hand techniques. Now techniques are things we can do with our fretting hand to add more notes or to get more mileage out of a note that we're already playing. There are loads of different techniques. In this lesson, we're going to focus on 3 really simple ones. These techniques are going to be things you're going to use in riffs. You're going to use them in guitar solos when you start going down the lead guitar rabbit hole. These are all things that you will be using. So these 3 techniques all come from the same family of techniques, which is known as legato. What that means is to join together. So the first technique we're going to do is called a hammer-on. Now you can practice this anywhere on the guitar you want with whatever fingers you want. I'm going to do this on the 5th fret of the G. So I'm just going to play that note with my index finger fretting it. Now that on its own is just 1 note. What I'm going to do then is I'm going to hammer on to the 7th fret with my 3rd finger. Now, hammer on will actually give us a slightly different sound than if we pick both the notes. If I play both those notes picked, it sounds like this. You get the attack of both notes from the pick. If I do a hammer on, it sounds like this. It's a much smoother transition between the notes. So a hammer-on technique is when you play one note and you use another finger to actually hammer onto another note. So in this case, I'm using my third finger and the 7th fret on the same string. But you'll notice I'm only picking once. The second note is generated by that hammering motion. So what I'm doing is while that 5th fret is ringing, I'm bringing the third finger down so the fingertip strikes the string with enough force to actually make the note sound. Now, in the early stages, this will be tricky because, like I said earlier, when you start playing, you don't always have the biggest amount of finger strength. So don't be surprised at first if this happens. And the note isn't as clear as you want it to be. Over time, that will develop. But you want to hit that note with enough force to make the next note sound. You can see that I moved my hand away so you can't see that I'm picking again. That is entirely generated by that third finger. You can do this technique all over the guitar. You may find it easier higher up on the thinner strings. Or try it with different fingers. Use your index and your middle finger. Or even your little finger. Hammer-ons can be done anywhere on the guitar in any way you want to do them. So practice that in a bunch of different places with different finger combinations and different note stretches. But really the technique is all about getting that other finger to hammer on as hard as the pick note. So this is something that does take time and practice to build up that finger strength. Start off slow and work out where the right amount of force is. So it can take a while to actually get that finger to be strong enough to make that note sound, but don't worry, it will come in time. When you're doing it, just practice it for a while, spend a little bit of time just playing a note and hammering on. When you first start doing this, try to make a conscious effort to really hit that hard. I know I mentioned earlier on in the video about not over fretting and pressing too hard, but actually try with this technique to use a little bit more force. Try to actually get that extra finger to hit that note a little bit harder. This will just start to strengthen up the fingertip, and then you'll actually be able to resort to doing it softer once you've got the technique in motion. The second technique I want to show you is the opposite thing, which is called a pull-off. So a hammer-on is when we play a fretted note and add a note above. A pull-off is when we have the 2 fretted notes in place and we pull off to the lower note. But this time, instead of hammering from the 5 up to the 7, this time both fingers are actually already in place. So I'm actually playing both frets there at the same time. But when I pick the string, I will only hear the position of the highest fret. Anything that goes on behind it doesn't actually matter. It's only the highest fret that sounds. But get both those in position ready. When we pick the string, we're going to hear that 7. And then what we want to do is with a slight angled flick, you want to flick your finger off the string. You don't want to go straight down because that will pull the string down with it. You just want to flick away at quite a shallow angle, not quite directly off the board, but you actually almost want to imagine that you're strumming the string with that finger as you pull it away. And that pulls you down to that lower pitch. If you just pull straight off by going directly upwards off the string, the second note loses a little bit of its energy. So you want to give that little flick to enable that other note to sound. The same rule applies with different fingers. You can try that with your middle finger or your little finger. Try that in different positions on the fretboard, different finger combinations, different note stretches. But the whole idea is of playing 2 fretted notes at the same time, playing the higher one, a slight flick as we pull the finger away, just almost strums the string. And that gives the second note plenty of energy there to work with. The third technique is going to be slides. This is when we play a note and we slide our finger to another note. To do this, we're not lifting our finger off the fretboard, we're keeping the pressure consistent and sliding it to another position. So I'm going from 5 to 7 there on the G, slides can be done both up and down. Now, when you're doing slides, it's really important that you get the finger pressure correct. If you press too hard with a slide, this happens. You get that noise of the fret drag in the middle, which you don't want. And if you don't press hard enough, that happens. And your string loses energy. So it's finding the right amount of pressure to play. It's basically the amount of pressure that you play when you fret a note, but you want to keep that consistent as you move your hand. Try this out with different fingers as well. It will be harder with your little finger because you're probably not going to be doing too many slides with that one. But the whole idea is to not press too hard or not press too soft and stop when you get to your target note. So I'm just doing a 2-fret slide there. Slides can be done over a bigger distance. If you're going to go for a bigger distance, let's say I'm going to do the 5 up to the 12, let's say, which is quite a big distance. It's quite easy to not quite get accurate with that slide. A good piece of advice to help there is when you pick your note, look ahead to the point you want to slide to. So when I pick that note, I'm looking at the 12th fret. Looking at that point actually makes it a little bit easier to stop. Don't worry too much about doing those big slides right now if you can't do them. It's not super important at this stage. Just focus on doing the 2 or 3 fret slides right now. Try it on different strings with different fingers. Start with 2 frets, and then if you get more comfortable, like I said, go to 3, go to 4. Increase that gap as you get more comfortable with it. It's a great technique to have in your arsenal, but remember what I said about finger pressure. Don't press too hard, but also don't press too soft. I know that's much easier said than done, but once you've done it a few times, your fingers will actually start to learn how hard they need to press, and then your muscle memory will kick in when you do that in future. All right, the 10th thing that we're going to learn is a really cool chord type, which is used mostly for rock music or punk music, but it does appear in most things, and this is a power chord. This is, if you're going to be a budding rock player, the most important chord you're ever going to learn. And it's a very simple chord to play. So we can do these all over the guitar. These are known as transposable chords. What that means is I can play it in any position and it will work. What we're going to do is we're going to learn 2 different types of power chords. We're going to learn power chords rooted off the low E string and off the A string. You can do them from the D or G strings as well, but there's a slightly different shape which we're not going to worry about at this point. Let's just focus on the E and the A strings because it's one shape and we can get a load of different chords out of it. So you can do this any way you want. I'm going to start at the 5th fret of the A string. I'm going to play that with my index finger. Then, using my 3rd finger, I'm going to play the 7th fret of the A string. So I'm 2 frets apart and a string apart. So it's 5th fret on the E, 7th fret on the A. Then I can add in the 7th fret on the D. I don't have to have that 3rd note in there if I don't want to, but it is a useful note to know how to play. If you find the 3 notes difficult, just focus on the 2. There's not a huge difference in sound. Whichever one of those works for you will still work. A power chord can be 2 or 3 notes. So let's just focus on it being 2 for now, but if you can add that 3rd finger, then do so. But really what we're doing is whichever note we're playing, and then the next one is 2 frets higher and 1 string down. So I said this was a transposable shape. So what that means is once I've got this shape, even though it's just 2 notes, I can move that around. So I can move it here to the 3rd fret, or the 1st fret, and it still works. As long as that distance is the same. With the 1st note, 2 frets higher, 1 string higher, down to the A string in this case, that gives me a power chord. Can also do exactly the same thing from the A. So this time my 1st finger is on the A string, and then the higher note is going to be 2 frets higher, 1 string down on the D string. So power chords are going to be very, very useful for you. You can move them around any way you want. And even just as an introduction to songwriting, you could just play a few power chords and see what you can come up with. And you can come up with your own riffs this way. It's a really fun way to start writing songs. You also have what are known as open power chords. Those involve our lower string being the open string. And then the higher note is once again 2 frets higher, 1 string higher. So in this case, an E open power chord is a low E string open with the 2nd fret of the A. Even though I'm only using 1 finger, I've still got the 2 notes in there and the distance between the notes is the same. That's the same on the A. That works as an open power chord. So learn those power chords, practice them because they're going to be super important for you. And now, the final thing we're going to do is we're going to learn 3 really easy classic rock guitar riffs. These 3 riffs are great riffs that you can learn right away to start you with your rock-based riff playing. Some of them use single notes, some of them use power chords, so there's a good combination of all of the things we've talked about in this lesson in these riffs. So the first one we're going to learn is a single note riff, and this is by the band Cream, and the song is Sunshine of Your Love, and it sounds like this. So this riff was played by Eric Clapton in the band Cream. And this is a great riff because it's single notes, but we're crossing the strings. So starting off on the 12th fret of the D string, playing that twice, playing the 10 on the D once, and the 12 on the D once more. So once again, that's 12 twice on the D, 10 on the D, 12 on the D. Then we've got this little walk down on the A string, 12, 11, 10. With those 3 notes, make sure you play it and then lift your finger slightly to mute the string. So the note's a little bit choppier. What you don't want is this. You don't want them to ring out there. Then we're jumping down to the 10 on the low E string. Play that with your 3rd finger. So then we're playing the 8 on the A with the index finger. And then the 10 on the low E twice more. Now when we play that 8 on the A string, on the record there's a slight string bend. Now we haven't talked about string bending in this lesson, but what you can do is play that note and just pull the string down just slightly. You'll see me doing it there. I'm still fretting, but I'm just pulling the string just a little bit. So slowly that riff is this. That's a great riff to get used to picking across different strings and using a couple of different finger movements there as well. It's a really fun but simple riff. The second riff we're going to learn is one that all guitar players need to know, and this is Smoke on the Water by Deep Purple, and it goes like this. So this riff uses a technique known as a double stop, which is kind of like the 2 higher notes of a power chord, but we can play this with 1 finger. So this is entirely on the D and G strings together. So start off by playing both those strings open. So it's open D, open G at the same time. Then I'm playing the 3rd fret on both those strings together with my index finger. And then the 5th fret. I'm using my 3rd finger, but you can use whichever fingers you want there. So kind of like the Sunshine of Your Love riff, we're stopping the notes short as well. So we're not going... We're actually muting them a little bit. With the open, you can either just rest your fingers on the strings, or you can use your picking hand to mute. Like that, or like that. With the 3rd fret, you can either rest the higher fingers on or release the pressure on the finger. And then let that 5th fret ring. The next bar is the same thing. Except instead of going straight to the 5, we do 6-5 first. So it's open, 3, 6-5. And again, those notes are on both the D and G together. third bar is the same as the first bar. And then the fourth bar is the 3 and the open. So that 3 is cut short as well. That's an essential riff for all guitar players to know, but be very careful if you're playing that one in a music shop. The final riff we're going to learn is a power chord riff, and this actually has some slides in there as well. This is by Black Sabbath, and it's the track Iron Man, and it goes like this. So this riff is entirely power chords. It's the 2nd fret of the A string up to the 5th, which you're playing twice like that before coming to the 7th fret. So there's 2 quicker hits at the 7. Then the slides come in, so come up to the 10th fret. So I'm playing the 10 on the A, the 12 on the D. Play it and slide it back a fret, both notes, 3 times. Then after the slides, we come down to the 7th fret of the A, down to the 5. So it goes. And then 2 hits of the 7th finish. So when I say 7, I actually mean the fret number that the power chord starts on. So you're still playing the same power chord shape. So here's that riff played slowly. So there are some tricky moments in that riff because we're doing some sliding power chords, which is a brand new technique, and moving power chords over quite a big distance. But like everything we've talked about in this lesson so far, start slow, make sure the technique is right, make sure it sounds clean, then build up the speed later on. Can't stress that enough. Through everything we've talked about, technique and the fact that whatever you're playing sounds right and sounds clean and all the fingers are in the right place, it's way more important than speed. And I really mean that in the strongest way, because if you focus on speed too early on, you're baking in bad habits with your technique. You do not want to do that because it's much harder to go back later on and fix that stuff. When you're practicing, make sure you focus on the technique and how clean it sounds first. Make sure speed is secondary. When you are practicing, it's very useful to practice things in little bursts. Now, most of us have very busy lifestyles, and it's quite hard for anyone out there to say, I'm going to sit down and practice for 6 hours every single day, because that's what our guitar heroes did. But in the real world, we can't do that. And a lot of us just don't have 6 hours a day spare to sit down and practice. So what can you do? You can practice in a way that I like to refer to as burst practicing, which is when you take an idea or take a technique or a concept, whatever it is you're working on, and spend 10 minutes or 15 minutes intensely working on only that one thing. Do that at some point during your day. If you get a chance later on that day, do the same thing again. Spend another 10 or 15 minutes on it. Do that every single day, and over the course of a week, you'll have committed a couple of hours to that same thing. Whether that's a single riff or a single technique, by the end of a week, you'll have amassed quite a few hours on that one thing, and you should be a lot closer to nailing it. Rather than just aimlessly practicing everything at once or not knowing where to go, it's really important to focus your practice time, especially if you are a busy person and this is something you're fitting in around other commitments in life. Make sure you're practicing the right things at the right time by doing it in this way. Small but intense bursts multiple times through a day. It's much better than one really intense session once a week. So there you go, there is my beginner's guitar lesson. So we've covered a lot in this video, a lot of different things, and there's a lot of new information out there, especially if you're brand new to playing. Most of this stuff you'll be hearing for the first time. Now, like I said at the start of the video, do not treat this as one lesson that you have to learn everything at once. Treat each segment of this video as a different lesson. Imagine that this is 11 different guitar lessons in one video. Spend that time intensely practicing on one thing, then move on to the next. So the whole idea here is that by the time you get to the end of all of this stuff, you are then ready to move on to the next level of your guitar playing. I've been teaching guitar for over 10 years, and a lot of this stuff is how I would structure the first 2 or 3 months of a new student's plan. This is all the stuff you need to do the groundwork, get your technique solid, and then you can start to advance as a guitar player. I'd love to hear how you're getting on with this. So as you're working through this stuff, keep me updated down below in the comments. I'd love to hear multiple times from the same people as you work through this over a course of weeks, because I'd love to hear how you're getting on with all of these tips. Let me know down below in the comments if there's also anything you think I've missed from this, because I'd be curious to think what other stuff people out there think beginner guitar players need to know. While you're leaving me a comment, let me know how you're getting on with all this stuff. Don't forget to hit that like button, and if you're new here, please consider hitting the subscribe button as well. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this lesson. I'm looking forward to hearing how you're getting on with this down below in the comments. Thank you for watching as always, and I'll see you very, very soon.